Red Bull seem to have figured Ferrari out. Both teams have been really balanced on pace this season, but whenever there is an on-track battle, the Red Bull seems to have the balance of it. What are Red Bull doing to come out on top? And how are Ferrari not able to counter it? Let me explain. Now, the first thing to chat about is how different these cars are. And that's not just going over all the little aero bits that are different, or how the engine power compares, but in the general philosophy of these cars. Red Bull is a pretty high drag, high downforce concept. But then, to get the pace on the straights, they have been trimming the car out completely, running it very low and having very low wing angles for the past few races.
It seems to be a car that is perhaps a bit less consistent. It does vary slightly by track, and it varies. Its biggest sensitivity seems to be the length of the straights, but this seems to be Red Bull's direction it's found for the car this year, and why they've gone this direction. So what they end up with is a car that really can't quite perform in qualifying, but as we've seen repeatedly through the year, once they've got those tyres brought in, the Red Bull's much kinder to the tyres, and then it carries this straight line speed.
And all of that is completely opposite to Ferrari. They have got a really low downforce setup, using the side pods to reduce the drag over the rear of the car. But then, to make sure they have all the downforce they need, they have been cranking up the wing angle.
So the car Ferrari have ended up with is effectively a very consistent car. It works very well in qualifying, and it certainly gets those tyres working really well, really easy to handle around a very fast single lap. Despite the porpoising.
Here are the fastest qualifying laps for the Ferrari and the Red Bull compared. The red bits are where the Ferrari is fastest, and the blue where the Red Bull is quicker. Right away in Bahrain, the pattern had already started. The Red Bull is a monster on the straights, which was a combination of setup, so running lower downforce, and the car as a whole, which is quicker through the fast corners. Then the Ferrari dominated the middle sector, pulling out 3 or 4 tenths of a second on the Red Bull. It's quicker through the braking zones, tight corners, and had more traction on the exits. So onto what Red Bull figured out. Starting in Bahrain and kind of going on from there, the Ferrari had been on top in terms of outright lap time. This is the race in Bahrain comparing Leclerc and Verstappen. The Ferrari was quicker almost every single lap, just showing what their car was capable of, despite the Red Bull being quicker in places. And yet, despite the Red Bull being measurably slower, it was able to pass the Ferrari, albeit for a couple of corners. Then in Saudi, Red Bull doubled down on their low drag concept. Here, the lap times were more similar, yet Red Bull won the race, able to pass and then stay ahead, even with DRS pulling Charles back into the fight. And if you remember back to the Red Bull and Vettel days, they did the exact opposite. They had a weaker engine, so put all of their effort into maximising the pace in the corners, hoping to get pole and then run away in the race before DRS kicked in. Now they have the power unit to fight on the straights. Then we get to Miami, where Red Bull went all out on a low downforce setup. Ferrari went the other way and bagged a 1-2 in quali. So the higher downforce setup was actually faster overall. But that isn't what mattered. It was about being able to pass. And Max was able to breeze past Charles and then hold off the Ferrari despite Charles having DRS. It really shows how fast that Red Bull is in a straight line.
Red Bull aren't guaranteed a pole position, but this straight line speed advantage, and particularly as we've seen at races, for example, at Miami with very long straights, lots of DRS zones, it really is able to just quite easily draft past the Ferrari on the straights. But then, as we saw after the safety car restart, the Ferrari, even with the advantage of DRS, doesn't have the straight line speed to tow back past the Red Bull. And this really means that, they've trumped Ferrari in the races with their car setup.
But one thing that had me puzzled was how the Ferraris weren't able to protect their tyres. Normally you would expect a higher downforce car to look after its tyres better, with less slip on those tyres. And that would be the benefit normally, run more downforce and come back in the latter stages of the Grand Prix. But Ferrari wasn't able to do this. So what exactly is going on?
Why is a high downforce Ferrari hard on its tyres, and where does, certainly it brings in a phase early in that tyre's life where it really, punishes the tyres. Again, as the tyres lose a bit of their gauge, a bit of their tread, the Ferrari seems to bring back to it. Maybe it's just putting too much heat into these tyres. So again, this is us now learning what these new low profile Pirellis, which are aimed to have, faster warm up, less thermal degradation with sliding, all of these factors they've brought into these new tyres, we haven't really characterised them yet. And what the Ferrari are doing isn't really working in race conditions with these tyres. It works in quali, which is great, but when you've got a rival that can just drive straight past you, it really isn't right. So Ferrari have got some work to do, maybe not so much on the aerodynamics, but maybe on how they bring the tyres in, or maybe something in the detail of their suspension, particularly with the damping, the springing, and things like camber change with the geometry of the suspension. It's something that Ferrari are going to need to look at to get these tyres to really work.
You should watch this video about how McLaren turn things around in Imola, but maybe we need to revisit that topic after Miami. And be sure to subscribe to the channel, as we can see many of you aren't. Thanks again to Manscaped for sponsoring this video, and to Scarbs for bringing his take. Thanks, and catch you guys in the next